I'm Cheryl Mitchell with the Early Care and Learning Partnership and also Tree Levin. And it's been my pleasure to be working with Building Bright Futures and Castleton University for the past few years. We try to interview people who are really important in the lives of our young children and their families. And it's a thrill today to have Rick Reardon, who's the director of the Center for Schools and also the director of education at Castleton University, here with us. So Rick, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Cheryl. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we could maybe just start with a little bit of background. I know maybe a tenth of the things that you do, but if you could talk a little bit about your role at the Center for Schools and your role as the Director of Education at Castleton.
Sure. And I think at this point in my life with COVID and everything else, I know about a tenth of what I'm doing today as well. So as the Director of Education at Castleton, I have three main priorities. One is to oversee the graduate and undergraduate programs at Castleton in the education department that lead to licensure or degrees. I also am the licensure officer at the university, so I oversee all of the ROPA evaluations, ROPA reviews, and...
Would you tell us what ROPA stands for?
So ROPA stands for Results-Oriented Program Approval, and it is the Agency of Ed's way of coming in every 7 years to existing licensure programs to make sure that we're still doing what we need to be doing. We've updated our programs to reflect the most current knowledge and performance standards for the endorsements that we license in. And for any new programs that we want to start, like our early childhood program, they come in and do what's called a new program review with a team of experienced educators, just to make sure that, again, we're starting a new program that focuses on the most current standards and the knowledge and performance expectations of those endorsements. So that's my second job, is to sort of coordinate all of the licensure piece for the university. And that includes not only the education programs in the department, but also things like Spanish and music and art and PE and health and all those licensure areas. And then third, and probably at this point most important, is I am the director of the Castleton Center for Schools. So the Center for Schools has been around since 2002, and it started as a way for there to be access to rigorous and relevant professional development in the southern part of the state, as most of what was happening up in the Chittenden County area. So this was going to be an opportunity to give teachers a chance to access professional development a little closer to the southern half of the state. We've expanded quite a bit in the last 12, 13 years, so we cover the entire state and beyond now. And that the center typically offers professional development in courses, workshops, institutes, trainings, symposiums, colloquiums, and a thing like this, the Summer Institute for Early Childhood that we've been doing now for the last 4 years. So that's essentially what my role is that it's three spinning plates all the time, trying to figure out the department needs, the licensure needs, and then everything happening with the Center for Schools.
So I have to say, over the years, I've been just so struck by your amazing energy and your willingness to see things differently, instead of saying, oh, we can't do this, or we can't do that, or we can't do the other thing. You've really been out there, especially in the early childhood world, saying, yeah, we can do this. I'm not quite sure how, but we can work it out. I think I met you through Darla Senecal's predecessor, who also was working in Rutland. And at that time, the Center for Schools had an office in downtown Rutland as well. So that's changed a little bit.
It has. We had an office space that the three of us, Tara Lidstone, my assistant director, and then Bethany Sprague, the office manager, used in the Rutland area, right downtown Rutland. And it was part of a bigger initiative that we had put forward to sort of grow ourselves into the Rutland community. So we had a couple of other different entities over there. The Polling Institute was over in Rutland. The Center for Entrepreneurship and Internship was over there as well, along with 3 art galleries that were located in the city. And we put 2 dorms in downtown. We had a couple of buildings that were renovated into dorm space, mostly for seniors and graduate students who had a little more maturity and B, a little more disposable income in that area. And so we grew ourselves pretty nicely out there in Rutland City, but we ended up having to kind of close down those initiatives and bring ourselves back to the campus about 2 years ago. Partly because of some money issues, but mostly because it was tough for me to be split that far from the work I was trying to do with the department and the work I was trying to do with the center. So it actually worked out better for me that we made that change.
And I think one of the things that's been so supportive of the early childhood community was that you came to this not from our traditional pathway of teaching in a preschool. I think you started out in special ed or some other, okay. And then moved into, you also teach leadership courses. You just have a broad view of education or learning writ large. And when people asked you about could we do the Summer Institute for early educators on the Castleton campus, I would say you didn't bat an eyelash. You pretty much said, yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, Cheryl, the very first meeting we had on that was with you and with Blanche Badisky and with Dave Walk. And I sort of sat in that meeting thinking, well, these three people know what they're doing. So I wasn't going to bat an eye on that one anyway. And I just saw it as, I have to tell you, when I left Florida, came back to Vermont, and was teaching at Castleton as a special ed professor. I left that position to take on a role as a special ed director in a local supervisory union for a couple of years. Didn't enjoy that. It was very much heavy with audits and budgets and school board meetings, and felt like I had lost my way with being a teacher at that point. Mm-hmm. And so Dave created a new position at Castleton called the Director of Education, which was going to oversee both the center and the department. And the first thing he said was, I see it being heavily entrepreneurial, and you will have a chance to create the position. You can have a say in what that position will look like. That was really hard to turn down. And so, you know, when you talk about trying to be outside the box and not necessarily batting an eye and never saying no, I kind of came into this with the idea that the best way we can approach this is sort of, as Tara reminds me, run until you get tackled, and try to be entrepreneurial enough so that we can make it work for whatever constituency group we're working with.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Summer Institute, because it really is one of the more phenomenal things that's happening for early educators. And I can say a little bit just from the point of view of the field that college educations are really important for people and college courses, but the price tag has been prohibitive for a lot of people. And this institute, which brings together people from Head Start, from elementary schools, from parent-child centers, from CIS, really not only gives people an affordable college course, but also a chance to really meet with their colleagues across all these different disciplines. And I'm wondering, I think you said you brought a little bit of the schedule. Do you want to show us some of that? What it's going to look like this year?
I can do that, sure.
Okay.
I hope. Can you see that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Did you see it?
We can.
Okay. So let me first say that for the first 3 years, this was an on-site Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4-day institute at Castleton. And when we were told that all of our coursework and institutes, et cetera, from this point, at least through the summer, were going to have to be offered online, we had to make a pretty drastic shift. And we think we are at a point now where we're feeling like it's still kind of an institute. We did not want the shift to make it just look like a whole series of siloed 3-credit courses and strands, that we wanted to still have it be institute-like. So if you look at the schedule, essentially each of the 4 days, first you'll notice they aren't 4 consecutive days. There's a 21st, a 23rd, a 28th, and a 30th. So a Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday. That spreads out the intensity of the Zoom. sessions. 4 straight days would be a little bit overwhelming. And the idea is that from 9 to 9:30 each day, there'll be a plenary speaker, a keynote. We're bringing in some luminaries in the field to be able to talk to all of the participants. And we're anticipating 100 to 120 again this year, to talk to them all about sort of key issues in the field. We're hoping that they'll be able to encourage folks to move forward with their day, acknowledging the work they do with young children. And then at 9:30, they'll be invited to another link that will start their sessions, their professional development sessions. And the expectation is they won't do any more than an hour and a half in the morning of live synchronous activity. They'll take a break, and then at 11:15, they'll jump into some more individualized asynchronous and synchronous work through lunchtime. I'll talk about the lunch dialogues in a second, but following lunch, they'll have another hour and a half of live Zoom synchronous work where they'll take another break and do an hour and 15 minutes of, again, individualized asynchronous or synchronous work, depending upon the strand. And then at the end, there'll be what we're calling a ticket out the door or an exit ticket, a way for us to sort of collect some formative data on what happened during that day, what kinds of things resonated with them, particularly in the asynchronous work, because it's hard for us to monitor what they're doing when they're not with us. So that's the way this thing kind of plays out for the 4 days. It's about 3 hours of synchronous live instruction and work, and then the rest of the day is scheduled to be done more individually. We're also going to look at doing a couple of lunch sessions, one on the 21st, one on the 28th, where we're calling them lunch dialogues. So this will be obviously voluntary, but people can join us during their lunch for a conversation, again, with some luminaries, with some folks in the field who would be able to answer questions, to have to share information about a particular topic. And if they want to come and join us during that, they can. If not, they'll go off at their picnic table and have their lunch. That's totally up to them. But then on the final Thursday, the 30th, we're actually having a lunch time where we want all to participate. Because if you recall last year, Cheryl, on that Thursday where we met in the pavilion, we were able to give some prizes away and to thank a bunch of people for coming, thank our sponsors, etc. And everybody got a chance to hear that. And at this point, we'll be able to not only do that, but we'll have 3 days worth of exit ticket out the door kinds of formative information. So we'll have plenty of feedback we'll be able to share with the group as well as far as the things that are resonating. So that's kind of what the structure looks like for the 4 days.
And we should say briefly that the registration for this whole thing will open up June 1st?
That's the plan. Yeah, that goalpost has moved a couple of different times.
Okay.
But at this point, we're looking at June 1st.
And that on the closing information, or if anybody would like more information about what the courses are going to be, who the instructors are going to be, some descriptions, they can get in touch with you. It will be posted at the end of this show, and you can send them much more information. And I think maybe we could also talk about this grew out of the Higher Education Early Childhood Consortium, which was the representatives from the colleges and universities that had early childhood programs coming together once a month to talk about what was going on in their programs, to set up ways that students could transfer coursework from one institution to another. And you graciously took on becoming the co-director of that group as well. So I'm wondering do you want to talk about any dreams you might have for that group as the months and years go forward?
Yeah, so I was really I was overwhelmed by that when I first joined that group because, again, my career has not been in early childhood. So a lot of it was kind of a steep learning curve for me. But in the last couple of years, I've really appreciated being a part of that group because we're really small in Vermont and we can't do things well in isolation with each other. I work with a group of curriculum directors in the southwestern part of the state, quadrant of the state. And we get together on a fairly consistent basis and have meetings where the very first 45 minutes to an hour are called points of commonality, so that every single supervisory union can talk about what they need for professional development and make some decisions about whether they're going to do that in collaboration with 5 or 6 or 7 supervisory unions and make it more cost effective, or whether it's something that's more unique to their own needs. I think the same is true in early childhood. So all the institutions of higher ed that are trying to offer a variety of early childhood programs, whether they're online undergrad through Linden and CCV, or whether they're something like we're planning, or UVMs or St. Mike's, that the more we know about what each other is doing, the more I think we can benefit from working with each other. So more than anything else, I would just love to see this group continue to be able to meet pretty regularly to share the kinds of things that are happening around the state in early childhood. So A, we don't replicate things, but then B, we can work in partnership with other institutions of higher ed, so we can just make sure that the opportunities exist across the state.
I think it's really exciting. At the time that that group came together, not most, but a lot of the higher ed institutions were closing out their early childhood programs. They were closing out their licensure programs. And now Castleton has stepped forward and you're putting in place an early childhood licensure program. I'm guessing COVID-19 has had an impact on your plans to have a child care center on campus, but maybe not. Maybe you could tell us about those two initiatives.
Yeah, well, the child care center first, that's been a tough sort of collateral damage, if you will, of the COVID experience. We knew from the time we started conversations about putting a child care center up on the campus that it was going to be a break-even program and maybe a little bit money loser, but not to the point where we were afraid of moving forward with it. We knew there was a need. We talked to a lot of supervisory unions working with young children. We talked to a lot of parents. Clearly the need was there for another affordable, rigorous child care center. But then when COVID happened, it really put us in a really difficult situation to move forward with that financially. It would have put the institution at risk. And so I guess the safe thing to say is that it is paused temporarily. Nobody is philosophically or programmatically against doing a child care center, but at this point, we've just not been able to move forward with it at this point. As far as the new program is concerned, you're right. We did notice that there were some dropping off, and we were getting a decent amount of requests through admissions for some early childhood programming, Center for Schools, etc. We made the decision to go ahead and start a new early childhood special education dual major program. So folks will come to Castleton and spend 4 years with an undergraduate degree at 120 credits, that when they finish, they'll have enough practicum and coursework to be licensed both as early childhood teachers or in early childhood and in early childhood special education. As far as I know, UVM is the only program that is doing that in the state like that. I know we have a memorandum of understanding with CCV, so folks can do a 2-year program there and then kind of jump in as well. We don't want to be too much in conflict with what Linden is doing, but Linden's is primarily online. It's a very different model. We hope to have our child care center as well play a major role in that program. At this point, the program has started. We had, I think, 14 in the freshman year cohort. Mm-hmm. My understanding from admissions is that there are 12 waiting to come in this fall. Now that may change with everything that's going on, but so that would have put 26 into the program in the first 2 years. Huh. We just finished the hiring process for the early childhood a tenure line professor to come in. We've offered the position to the finalist, waiting to hear on whether she's ready to accept it. I've about pretty much handed over my house. in order to get started with us. But she, the one that finished finalist in the position, was fantastic. So we're really excited about that. And then we'll bring ROPA in again, the folks from the Agency of Ed Licensure department that come in and take a look at new programs, and we'll have them come in, look at the syllabi, look at the instructor, take a look at our finances to make sure that from a fiduciary standpoint, we're ready to roll with that, make sure the administrators are supporting it as well. And we'll be ready to go from a licensure perspective.
It's fantastic. And I think also in your Fantasyland, or maybe it's not Fantasyland, you were thinking about expanding the Center for Schools to be the Center for Schools and Communities.
Yeah, I talked about that a few times. I think we can replicate the model. The reason the Center for Schools in and amongst itself has been popular is that because teachers typically have a pool of money that they have because of their contracts that allow them to take a course or two every year. And so we know that if we market ourselves well and we offer the right coursework, that we're going to do well through the center, and we have done pretty well. But I've always wondered, are there ways for us to support other stakeholders that are sort of aligned with the field, whether they're psychologists or psychiatrists or social workers, therapists, etc. Those folks who may not necessarily need credit, but they need CEUs or seat time for professional development. I watch the Higher Ed Collab, and I watch the Stern Center and a few others doing some really nice work in that area. And I think that we could replicate that. So I had a conversation with my provost about that just the other day. I said, I'd love us to be the Castleton Center for Schools and Communities so that we can broaden our reach a little bit and broaden the kinds of things that we offer through the center in the area of professional development. So yeah, that's the plan.
Good. Because I think a lot of people are hoping that as we have these discussions about restarting, recovering, what will our communities look like? How do we support people going forward? I think there's a lot of hope that maybe we'll get away from those strict silos of this is education, this is social work, and move to a more collaborative approach. And I certainly see Castleton as being a leader in doing that. I'm also worried that we're going to run out of time here, and I'm wondering, we have 2 minutes, if there's something that I didn't ask that you'd like to talk about, or if you just want to make some kind of closing dream.
Well, let me shorten this one because it's a story that I tell on occasion as far as why the Center for Schools tends to do well. A couple of years ago, the former president, Dave Walk, had asked if I would do a talk with a 50-year reunion class that was on campus for their brunch and their football game and all that. And he said they were all educators back 50 years ago at Castleton. I think they'd get a kick out of hearing what's happening through the Center for Schools, through the graduate programs. So I gave about a 15-minute talk about what was happening in education. And then as I sat down, one of the former superintendents said to me, I don't understand why the Center for Schools goes out into the communities and asks them what they need for professional development. I thought you were the institute or the intellectual drivers of the community. You should be telling them what they need. And I said, no, it doesn't work that way. It's not with the center. We try to get out into the communities and figure out what they need, and then figure out a way for us to align some credit and some rigor around that work.
Right. Well, that's exactly the approach that makes us all appreciate both what Castleton is doing and what you in particular are doing, Rick. And we're grateful that you took the time to talk to us today. Your contact information is going to show up in a minute. I just also want to give a shout out to Darla Senecal, who is the Regional Coordinator for Building Bright Futures in Addison County and Rutland counties, and she's put together, usually we do these interviews in the studio, which isn't open right now. So Darla's our producer. Call on her when you want something.
With her as well. We've really enjoyed working with her as well, Cheryl.
Yeah. Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you.